Justin Peters.
Megan Miller, how are you?
How does it feel? I don't even think I shared this with you. This is revolutionary status right here, my friend. You are the first male to be on hashtag share your story.
Well, it's an honor. I am so glad that you asked me to come on. Super excited for this conversation today. I get you so much. You and I connect so well. So I'm really excited to have this like amazing conversation. Even if nobody listened to it and we weren't recording right now, this is exactly what I'd want to be doing right now.
Oh, you're the best. Soul nourishing, right?
Yes.
And for those of you that aren't watching us on YouTube, I have to tell you, I love Justin's shirt. He got on, and the first thing I said to him, it wasn't hello, it wasn't good to see you. It was, I love your shirt.
So I have a wardrobe of about, I don't know, 4 or 5 floral type shirts, anything that has flowers. I also used to do like floral ties when I'd go into the office. So I've been keeping this whole Friday floral theme for quite a long time now.
I love it. Do you believe in the theory or the thought process that you act the way you dress?
I do, honestly. And that's actually dawned on me a little bit more. Obviously, I think there's a lot of confidence around dressing, and if you put something on and you feel good in it, that it can put you in this different kind of state. I definitely get that whenever I put a suit on. I bought this awesome pinstripe suit, and every time I wear it I feel so confident in myself.
Yeah.
But sometimes I want to have fun. Fridays are for fun, so I like to wear these floral shirts. I always put those on, and it's a really great primer for me just to like go out, have some fun today, kind of like your sticky note example too, where you'd write like let's have fun, or like let's
Yes.
have fun on that. It's a good primer for me every time I see myself in a camera. Fridays for fun, here we are.
We are going to have fun today, my friend. We are. I love
Let's do
that.
it.
So, I want to share with our beautiful tribe how we came into each other's lives because I truly believe, and I say this all the time, but I truly believe it. There are little serendipitous moments that happen every single day that if you rise up off the screen, if you rise up off the task list, if you rise up from all the to-dos in your mind, that you can lean into them. And there's some really beautiful moments that happen. And the serendipity for you and I coming into each other's lives is we were introduced through the Money Made Easy podcast hosts, which were our two incredible humans, high school kids that are creating this narrative or creating this community around money.
Those guys are crazy. I can't believe it. I think they were 17 and 18 whenever I got
Yes.
introduced to them. They're out there making a podcast all about personal finance, exploring these really interesting concepts that really didn't even boil into my life until, I don't know, at least my early 20s. And I wasn't thinking about creating content and educating others on it on top of that at that age for sure. Those guys are super impressive. They actually got a scholarship for FinCon, which is a personal finance content creator conference that's happening this fall. So I'm hoping to run into them again
Get
at some point in
out.
time, but they are amazing people.
Oh, and what I love, and I think, even 38, talking about money, about finances, it's uncomfortable because it's things that were never taught. Right.
It truly is. I mean, I don't understand why it's not discussed more often. I definitely am trying to shed some light on that. I'm just a big believer that getting control of your money is such a critical aspect to eventually getting some kind of freedom. Like if you feel tight and never in control of finances, then it's really hard to go out and invest and go jump into other hobbies and interests and careers if you're always thinking about having to get to the next paycheck. So it holds so many people back. I wish it was more talked about in school, in college, and even post college as well, especially with inside of your friend circles. It's very rarely spoken about with
Yeah.
this is what's going on in my life. I'm struggling here. What do you guys know about it? And, I know that. So it's a huge thread that I talk about on my podcast.
Yes. And I want to get into your podcast. The struggle is real. I love the community you're building. But before we get into that, I want you to share with our listeners on our first conversation together, you had shared with me so vulnerably and so authentically about your journey to finding this podcast. What led you to build this community? And I would love for you to share that with our listeners.
Awesome. You mind if I do the extended story here? And
Oh, have at it, my friend. It's a beautiful story.
awesome. Well, this was, let me put some light to this. This was probably 2019. It was April of 2019. I bought two microphones. I found podcasting maybe 2 or 3 years prior to that, and it just like all of a sudden that was like an aha moment that was like, oh my gosh, this is how I learn. Like I wasn't like you where I was like carrying a book around with me when I was a little kid all the time and like obsessed with reading. I'm seriously the guy that has to like put a timer on his phone for like 20 minutes. I have to sit down and focus for those 20 minutes to read a book. And then a timer goes off and I'm usually shutting it. And I always read because, readers are, or leaders are readers type analogy, but it was never my preferred modality of learning. I ran into Talk NPR. I was working at an insurance brokerage at 19 and felt so uncomfortable in the brokerage because I was working with people 2 to 3 times my age. And it was hard for me to relate. I didn't know anything about what was happening in the news. I didn't have kids. The weather quickly became a thread that runs out pretty fast. So I was like, you know what? I need to get educated so that I can have some more conversation. I started listening to NPR on my way into work in the morning. And I was like, okay, cool. I liked that. And that led me to podcast. And I found podcasting. And I was like, oh, holy cow, this is great. I love this, everything about this. And then, as I mentioned, 3 years later, kind of dawned on me that, I should create in this space as well. Like, I want to be one of these people that have been so impactful over my last, 3 years in my learning and education. So I bought mics April of 2019, and all of 2019, I never got the podcast going. It was one of those deals where I tried to be too perfect with it. I tried to plan everything out before I launched the podcast. And I looked up January 1st, 2020. I'm a huge goal setter. I was looking at 2019 goals, start a podcast, wasn't crossed off. And I was like, dang, man, that's such a bummer. This is something that I want to invest in and actually do in 2020, though. So it coincided with a self-made sabbatical. I ended up leaving my job in 2019, summer of 2019, and jumped to a different position, kind of that grass isn't greener on the other side situation. I thought I needed a change, and I made a very fast jump to a different agency and quickly found out, I tell people 3 months, it was probably closer to 3 weeks, that was not the right position for me. And I drug through it for quite some time until I came across a recruiter. I was having a conversation with him, and he was giving me some really timely advice of, I was telling him, I was like, you know what, I'm working through this job right now. It's not where I want to be. I want to hit the 1 year mark though, before I do leave the organization, because of the whole, you need to have at least 1 year of experience so that there's not this blemish on your resume. And he just looked at me and he was like, why? Like, why are you doing that? He's like, do you really want to waste the next 7 months of your life just to get this quote, like societal expectation that you have to be at a job for 1 year? And I was like, whoa, you're totally right. So that provoked a self-made sabbatical, because he also shared with me some timely advice of like, just take some time off, Justin. Like, if you can financially afford to do it, maybe some white space would be really great for you. And along with that, he said, spend the first part of that sabbatical not focusing on work, and go and dive into a project or something that you've always wanted to do, but you've never felt like you've had the time for it because of work. And of course, I was looking at those goals, and that was starting a podcast. And I was like, you know what? I'm starting the podcast in 2020. It's what I'm focusing on right now. I called my best friend, Mason, and I said, hey, man, do you want to be the first guest on my podcast? And he said, yes, of course. We booked a date 6 days from then to record our very first episode together. And I was like, holy cow, I swear I did more in those 6 months, or those 6 days leading up to that podcast interview, than I did in the last 8 months whenever I initially bought mics. So that was kind of the genesis of The Struggle Is Real. And it's been an absolute pleasure getting to interview so many amazing people over the last 2.5 years and share so much content and education out with my community.
You had dropped so many beautiful nuggets through that. I was writing like a mile a minute. And there's a couple things I want to highlight on that. One, I love how you talk about the white space. I think we are so quick, speaking from as a type A'er.
Yep.
Man, I will jam that calendar full of to-dos based on other people's timelines. And I never give myself enough space to really rise up from it all and think clearly. And and it's no wonder to me then why people say they have these aha breakthrough moments while they're on vacation and they're away from it all. But I think that there's just these little micro steps that we can infuse for the white space. Like, for instance, maybe I like just yesterday, I said to myself, I need to read these articles and I feel like I'm getting distracted. So I popped in my car for 15 minutes, took it around the block, and I just parked there to be away from it all. Do you do any of these practices to continue to keep this sort of white space and clarity and connection to your intuition, whatever you want to call it?
Definitely. I definitely see myself, first of all, from a bigger level, taking a sabbatical just like I did. I ended up taking 7 months off between March or
Mm.
January of 2020 to September of 2020. I see myself taking sabbaticals as often as I need to, but at least probably every 5 to 8 years. I think that did so much wonder for my career which is surprising. Like, take 7 months off from your career, and that was a good thing. But it was such an amazing experience for myself. I also try to do this pretty frequently when I'm just feeling overwhelmed with work. Then maybe it is okay to jump out a little bit early on a Friday and really not think about too much stuff over the weekend outside of exactly what you want to be spending your time on right at that time. And then I was just on vacation last week too. I did not bring my laptop. I didn't bring my phone with me, so I couldn't check my work email or think about my work, anything that's happening at work as well. I think giving yourself some of that space, of course, is a really great idea. But
Mm.
to go back on that initial conversation that you started off this thread with too, I th- I think the thing that I really learned through this sabbatical, and what was really causing me so much angst up until that time, was that, I came out of college, and you're kind of, I don't know if you're kind of forced this direction or if I just thought it was this direction, but I thought your, early career was meant for career clarity. Like, you need to start figuring out what you want to do, and you need to start focusing on your career path, and you need to like lane into something. And what I've really found through my 20s is that you should give yourself a break. And especially that first decade of your career should not be for career clarity, but for professional curiosity. It is
Mm.
so okay for you to be bouncing around different jobs and trying new things and picking different positions with inside your company, or pulling projects to you that you just have some curiosity on. You're like, I don't know if I like this or not. And you try it. And it's so okay. If you don't like it, then let it go. You don't need to force anything there. But I see so many of my peers look up at, their late 20s, early 30s, and they're like, wow, I actually hated what I've been doing over the last 8 to 10 years. And I totally wasted all that time. I was in that camp for part of it. I was like, man, I wish I could have a couple of my years back too, where I was just doing things that were fine. Like, but nobody wants to be fine when it comes to
Mm.
their career. And there are different stages of life whenever, sometimes your job just needs to be a job and you need the paycheck. But at the same time, like, we should always be moving towards something else, and some kind of sense of fulfillment, and whatever that means with inside your career or outside of that.
Oh God, I love that. Professional curiosity. And that's what we're never taught. Right. Like, I know for me, when I look back on my 15-year career journey in this sales space, really, if I ever took the time to get off the hamster wheel and give myself a moment of clarity, I would have realized that I always had those gut whispers that I was meant for more, but it was difficult to allow myself to lean into that because here I was getting the validation, here I was achieving, and I was good at it. So it was filling that need of significance. And just Justin, I would love your feedback on, for anyone in our audience right now who is listening and they're thinking to themselves, yes, Justin and Meg, yes, I feel that in my career. I know I'm meant for more, but I don't know where to even start. What would be one micro step that you would recommend for them, something easy for them to infuse to give themselves that clarity? Is it the white space?
Yeah, I think, of course, if you could take some space, if you could take some time, whatever that duration would be, I think that's always a really great, place to start. But I also think that a lot of people maybe don't have that privilege to take some time off from their career as well. So the thing that I did during the white space that I created for myself was invest in something else outside of my career. So if I were to give someone a step in a different direction, it would be pick something that you're curious about and go explore it.
Mm,
If you, I once again, I woke up and I was like, wow, I love podcasting. Why don't I become a podcaster? And I also didn't frame it as I'm going to make this huge podcast right now, but just the sense of I want to try to start a podcast and see what that feels and what return that I get from it. And if I still enjoy doing it, I could committed to myself to podcast for 1 year. I was going to produce 26 episodes. And at the end of that 1 year, if I was no longer having fun podcasting, then I was going to allow myself to let it go and invest that time into something else. I would encourage your listeners, maybe do something similar. Like the relief that having a podcast has given my career so that my career can be centered around more so, just paying for the bills, but also, prior to the podcast, it was also how I got fulfillment and where I found purpose and where I built my network and how I learned new skills. It was all of these things. And now I have my podcast that is where I learn new things, where I meet interesting people like yourself, how I get such a sense of fulfillment and purpose. And now I don't have to put my career up on such a big pedestal
mm.
that it was at prior to that. And of course, like every job has its pros and cons. And if you have so much expectations for it, you're just, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's never got to fulfill all of those things, regardless of how awesome your employer is or your career is or the job or the company that you created is. It's just hard for it to do all of those things. So I would say for the next 30 days, pick something that you're interested in and go invest a little bit of time in that.
Oh God, I love that. There are so many great nuggets in that, Justin, that we never culturally talk about, right? So I love how you said, just if you're not having fun, that's a sign. Don't do it anymore. Like, when did that stop being a gauge?
I have no idea. Like that should be that should be a barometer or something thought about for the majority of things in life. Life is too short not to have fun. Come
Not to
on.
have fun. Yes. And the other thing I loved about what you said is that we look at our jobs to give us all of this fulfillment, right? It's our identity, it's who we are, it's our relationships, it's our validation in the world. And when it's not hitting all of these check marks and it's like all your whole entire life and that's what you benchmark everything on, well, no one can live up to that, but you're not living like your best life. And what I got from what you talked about, Justin, when you gave yourself enough courage to lean into this podcasting and something that lit you up outside of the job, it changed how you showed up in the job.
Yes, 100%. It gave me a different sense of identity. I was no longer working in financial services, but I had another title. I was a podcaster. Like I was like, oh man, I got something else to wake up for every single day outside of just my day job. And I love my day job too. And I enjoyed my job at the time as well. But it was missing something
Mm-hmm.
that if I could have looked around in my career, maybe I could have pulled something in for that. But you can also just build something outside of your career as well. I mean,
Yes.
we have 168 hours in a week, and we spend 40 of those hours working, on average at your career. That means you have 128 other hours in the week to spend on whatever you want to spend on. And let's say you got to sleep, there's 56 hours a week, and you need a little bit of time on the routine things like feeding yourself and bathing yourself, etc. That still typically allows people 80 hours in a week. And I know I'm speaking to a lot of females right now, and I'm guessing 30, 40, 50-year-olds as well. So I'm guessing you also have the job of being a mother and, you probably own a business and all of these other things, but 80 hours, like we have two more careers worth of time that we could fill with certain things. Give yourself the permission to spend 5 of those hours doing exactly what you want to be doing.
I love that. Permission slip written, y'all, by Justin Peters.
There it is.
There it is, written. So I was thinking about you this morning. I was listening to Sarah Blakely have this conversation with Tony Robbins. And one of the things I love so much about Sarah Blakely is she is so open with saying, listen, I didn't have a business degree. I failed the LSAT twice. I came out with $5,000 against these major, major companies. And she tributes a lot of her success to mindset. And for those of you that may not know Sarah Blakely, she started this, I guess you would call it like hosiery company, Spanx, and $1 billion before the age of 40. She was featured on Forbes. Like, she has had just this incredible success. Justin, would you say, are there any mindset hacks that you infuse in your life, or habits or daily rituals that you do to set yourself up for success?
First of all, my girlfriend absolutely loves Sarah Blakely. I love Sarah Blakely's husband, Jesse Itzler. Do
Oh,
you know the name?
yes.
He's so
Yes.
good. He's
I
so
didn't know he
good.
was a rapper. I
Yeah.
loved that.
He's like one of the most fascinating people that I know. He's got a program called Build Your Life Resume, and it's kind of how I'm subscribing to my own life as well. Just like doing a bunch of like really amazing experiences and implanting those into your life. And I've found a lot of fulfillment. He's one of the main reasons why I ended up running an ultra marathon, which we can get into if you want, but that is a crazy story in itself. But back to your original question, mindsets, something that I focus on. Actually, I'm going to pull something from you because I think I've been thinking about this recently, prepping for this conversation and
Yeah.
listening to some of the conversations that you've been having. But you were talking about on an episode that repetition is the mother of all skill.
Mm,
And that has brought me a lot of energy in terms of like life. And I think you were talking about it in context of like, why even bother? Like, I have this podcast and I look up at Mel Robbins or Marie
mm,
Forleo, and I'm like, oh, I'm never going to be that. But then you also realize like they've been doing this for like a decade plus, and they put
yes.
a lot of repetition to get to the skill set that they've currently had. And that humans want this like 100% certainty, and it just doesn't happen that way. Like, it's just like really hard, and you got to start somewhere. And like listening to episode 1 versus now episode 71 is just a huge shift. And I'm guessing as a podcaster, you can go back and listen to your first one compared to this one too, and you're like, whoa, the improvement that I've made in a short period of time is incredible. If I extend that forward as well, like, what is the impact that I can do? So I try to bring that into a lot of my thought process when I'm feeling overwhelmed or when I'm feeling discouraged about not making progress in a certain area or having to start out at this beginner's mindset aspect. I'm like, you know what? I don't know it right now. I'm not good at this right now, but I can get somewhere. And I've already
Mm,
proved to myself that I can improve in a certain area. Just looking at podcasting and being like, whoa, I'm just such a better interviewer, conversationalist in a 2-year time span. And 2 years, I feel like, is such a short duration. If you extend that out, 10 times that in a 20-year span, I have no idea where I can be, but it's super exciting to think about where that could potentially be.
I love that. Have you heard of the book? I'm probably going to jack up the name, The Gap to Gain, or From Gap to Gain. I think it's The Gap to Gain by
Okay.
Dan Sullivan.
Okay. I haven't
Check
heard
it.
of it. No.
Oh, check it out. You will love it. So, as you're talking about taking a moment to just appreciate how far you've come versus the gap,
Hmm.
it gives you this sort of energy to continue to move you forward. Like, we live in a life culturalized to always be in the gap mode. Okay, well, you started the podcast. When are you going to get your first 500 downloads? When are you going to get the 700? When are you going to get the 1,000? So you're always living in this never ending ladder that you've created
Yeah.
to air quote benchmark your success. And it's just this exhausting cycle that you put yourself in, and you never take a moment to celebrate the gain.
Yes. The very last phrase that you just said there is the important aspect. I think it is very, very hard to not recognize the gap and to also, I mean, I think in the right context, it can give you a little bit of motivation too, to know that there is still a goal that I want to get to. But it is also just as critically important to appreciate and celebrate how much of the gap you've already closed
Mm,
as well. And I find that really important. I have a practice with my podcast that on the annual anniversary of every episode, I go back and listen to it. And of course, it's really great because I get to remember these conversations that I've had with like this incredible person. I usually reach out to them like, oh my God, thanks for coming on the show a year ago. That was so fun. I love talking about XYZ. But what I found through that practice too is like, once again, I'm like appreciating like how far I've come. Once again, I actually I look sometimes I'm like, wow, I was actually better than I thought I was. And I at this whole time I never thought I was very good. I like reference episode 7 as like a huge bomb to me. And I recently listened to it because it hit its 2 year a couple months ago. And I was like, yeah, it wasn't great, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it was either. But also it gave me a benchmark. And I'm like, okay, once again, where I was then and where I am now, night and day difference. Justin,
Mm,
pat yourself on the back for the amount of work that you've done to get here.
God, I love that. And what I've been hearing from this conversation from you is to have the courage to look back. Like, so we want to put it in a vault. I know for me, man, I've never listened to that first episode again because
You
I'm
should do
scared,
it.
and I should. And this has given me the courage to go back and listen to the first episode to appreciate how far I've come. So I would just say to our listeners, whatever that looks like for you, whether that is the blog or whether that's photography or whatever that looks like, have enough courage to go back in the vault and open that up and see how far you've come, because you'll
Yes.
be so surprised.
So
I want to talk to you about something that, whew, Justin, I needed you in my life for a long time.
let's go.
Finances. I was at one point in my life, and I didn't even realize it because I was so scared to open the bills, which should have been a sign in and of itself that I was overspending, looking for validation in all the wrong places. And I was $20,000 in debt. And I was just, and it never felt good because they were always sitting in the back of my mind. To your point earlier, like you can't live your best life when this hangs over you. So, what is one money micro step that you could share with our listeners who are in that same spot that I was, know they're overspending, trying to fill a void, frightened to open up the credit cards at the end of every month? What is one thing that they can do to help put their money and their story around money back in order?
It really surprises me that you were in that space at some part in your life. The type A and the kind of like really focused person that you are would make me think that you wouldn't have found yourself in that situation. Did you just never focus on personal finances up and
And
through that point?
here's the thing, here's what's even more messed up about the whole thing. On the outside, everything looked great. Like if you would have looked at me on the outside, you would have thought, man, she has her shit together. And
Mm.
I was the farthest thing from it. So it was all a facade. I think for me, it was a couple things. One, I think you inherit, if you're not aware of it, your family's story around money. And I was raised by a single mom who we never really had enough and we never really talked about it. So I, one, didn't really know how to handle my finances. And then I think two, I wasn't in a good space myself. Like I was living this life on everyone else's terms, addicted to validation from the job. The job was my everything. And I was so desperate for an outlet that I think trying to buy the thing I thought would fulfill me, and it never did.
Mm. Did you feel like you deserve that at some point in time? You hit some success in your career, and I'm guessing you should feel like you should allow yourself to spend on some of these things that you never had.
Yeah, I'm sure that played a part in it too. I was also working my ass off. So I think I probably thought to myself, well, you're working, my job was my everything. So you deserve this nice handbag. Whereas I never really took the time, because I think we deal with stuff on surface level. I never took the time to peel back the layers to really understand why I was looking for that validation.
Mm. And I'm not avoiding your question, but just one more follow up to
Yeah,
that
please.
too. When did things turn? What was the impetus for, okay, I'm going to look at the credit cards. I'm going to face this head on now. I'm going to get my shit together. Let's do it.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to. So it was, it's like, in the back of your mind, if you're not doing things the way you should, if
Yeah.
you're honest with yourself. And I knew it. So what started this really peeling back the layers of this credit card debt was my husband, my now husband. So at the time we were looking to buy a house together, and he was like, Meg, if we're going to buy a house together and get this mortgage, we have to really look at our finances here. So he had this beautiful, and you'll appreciate this, auto calculated, tabbed out
I
spreadsheet.
love it.
And and I was thinking to myself, I was telling my girlfriends later, I came to that conversation thinking, man, I am screwed. I came out with a manila folder with like pieces of paper falling out the side. So really, it was the most uncomfortable situation that I have ever had, sitting down with him and really peeling back the layers of it. I had thought up to that point I was $10,000 in debt. And I did not realize until that conversation with him that I was $20,000 in debt. And my credit score was 550.
Yikes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah. You want to talk about having a moment of clarity and being like, I gotta fix this.
Yeah. Good for him for helping push that along. Also, I'm guessing he had to be somewhat thoughtful and effective around broaching that conversation, because that would be really hard to allow you to come into that and find this balance between taking ownership, but also like not being defeated about the situation that you're in. And
Oh, yes.
that's hard.
And I'll tell you, I beat myself up for a long time. You know, we are more critical of ourselves than we are of any other person in our life.
Yep.
Like we will forgive other people for harder things that they've done to us than we ever would ourselves. So for a long time, Justin, I had this story in my mind about how I was so messed up about money and why did I do this? And I should know better. I'm college educated. I have this good career. And here I was, and I allowed myself to get to this point. But what I had to realize, the long journey, is I really didn't know. And I think you have to be a little gentle to yourself. And when you know better, you do better. And
Mhm.
and to your point, Michael, my now husband, was so kind to me and was not abrasive. He was not saying, you dummy, how did you do this? Like he was like, listen, we're going to sit down and do this together. And I'm going to help you get on the other end of that. And that to me, I think gave me the courage because I wasn't doing it alone.
Mm. Man, hats off to Michael, man. He sounds like a great guy.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, he most certainly is. He was well worth the wait.
Yeah. So I think this conversation, a lot of it just starts just with what we're doing right now, unpacking it a little bit, giving yourself some grace, figuring out where you are, how you got there, where you want to go. So, I mean, that might be the start of this.
Mm.
It's really hard to give personal finance advice because it's truly that personal finance is personal. So everybody's situation is different, and the advice, the specific advice I could give would differ from one person to another.
Yeah.
But I think most people could benefit from taking an inventory of what's the current situation. So, okay, you opened up the credit card statements, you figured out what's going on, having a conversation with yourself or with the people that are most important to you of how did I get here? And I heard it through your story, the single mom story, and I was never taught, and there was never any, really any formal education around it. So give yourself some grace and some room to be like, okay, I did the best I could and it got me here. So clearly, clearly something needs to change, but that's in the past. Let's not dwell on the past. Let's just think about the future.
Mm.
And then idolizing or, putting something out there and being like, where do I want to be? So I'm guessing you visualized and started to think about the $0 credit card statement that came in.
Yes.
That's what I want to get to. That's what I want to focus on. Okay. So you got your end state, you got your current state, you kind of know what got you to your current state, laying all of that out there. In terms of a tangible, if you are in credit card debt in particular, I would say pick a category that you overspend on. I think most people like you knew in a rough idea where you were, that you weren't in a good situation. You probably knew what might be causing some of that. If there's one thing in particular, like shopping or eating out or something that really caused some of that, that might be making a huge impact. And if you don't want to tackle the most, I don't know, emotionally driven category, pick something that you're like, you know what? I know I spend way too much on fast food, but I don't want to be spending any on fast food right now, or I don't want to be spending as much as I am spending on fast food right now. And it's not going to bother me whatsoever if I get that aspect under control. So pick assign yourself a goal. It all starts with goals. It all starts with some kind of clarity. So if it's okay, I don't want to be spending any more than $50 on fast food every single week. Perfect. Got it done. I like the cash envelope method, which is essentially go grab $50, put it into an envelope, put that envelope into your purse or into your wallet, and that's your $50 that you can spend on fast food. Every time you go out to fast food that week, you got to pull that envelope out. You got to pull the money out of that, and you got to spend with that. And once you no longer have any money on that in that envelope, then you're out for the week. Then you're done spending on fast food. So, getting some kind of sense of control around a specific category and starting to build up some small wins, I think could eventually lead to some better habits. And I see it a snowball very, very quickly. You only have to peak interest in personal finance, and you got to see a little momentum. And then all of a sudden you're like, I can do this. And then
Yes.
it's no longer fast food, but it's okay. All of these things I know I'm spending way too much money on. I want to make a budget for these. I want to get all this under control. And then, you look up a year or two later and you're getting credit card statements that are only from last month's expenses.
I love what you said about the cash envelope. That is easy. You can do that tomorrow. And it's a way to tackle it where you don't feel paralyzed.
Yes.
Oh,
Agreed.
I love that. Do you think that we are really messing things up as a society moving away from cash? Like I never carry cash. I never carry cash. Like the
Yeah.
other day I was at the post office. Their credit card machines were down. They were like, "That's going to be $7." I had to I had to get all my change out from the purse. Do you think that that's a bad thing, moving away from cash?
I don't know. I haven't given too much thought to that, I guess. I am somebody that sees plastic the same way that I see cash. I know when I
Mm,
swipe my credit card, it hurts me just as emotionally as pulling the money out of the wallet. Like you, I don't carry a whole lot of cash in me. I usually only have a couple bills in there for those situations where I find myself at the post office and the ATM's broken or the
yeah.
credit card machine is broken and I can't pay. Um, but I could definitely see that being an impact on someone that doesn't necessarily have the same emotional tie to swiping a credit card or kind of the pay later type mentality as cash. Sometimes I know lots of people that they pull the cash out and they know it's gone forever once they hand that over. So if you're
Yeah, it
somebody
feels more
that's like that,
real.
yes, if you're someone that's like that, I definitely think it's a detriment right now that we're moving away from cash.
Do you have any, what's the word I'm looking for? Either, well, actually, struggle is real. I was going to say, are there any? So the one thing I think, let me backtrack here. My mind's going a mile a minute. So
Go ahead.
the one big problem I think that we have, or the big obstacle, is that we're never really taught. If you were raised the way I was, you never really taught about how to handle money and how to
Mhm.
really, what is a budget and what does that look like? And it's uncomfortable to have those conversations. But if someone is sitting out there and they're like, yes, I want to start to build a budget, but I really don't know how. Are there any like great money mindset books that you've read or podcasts or some sort of resource that our listeners could go to and begin to, in their comfort of their own home, begin to dabble into that very uncomfortable conversation?
Yep. I'll give two book recommendations. First one, I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, a great elementary book to get into. He's got
Mm,
easy breakdown chapters. He speaks a lot of kind of no nonsense type personal finance conversations, and it's a lot of DIY type as well. He empowered me that I can do majority of this on my own, and I don't need to go out and hire somebody else or outsource this to somebody else. And I think that's really important for someone that is seeking some kind of confidence around money. That of
mm,
course we can all go outsource that and pay an accountant or
yeah.
pay someone to do some of this, and sometimes that's right too. Going out and getting, buying a course or paying for a coach early on to help frame some of this for you could be really beneficial. But I'm also really big into making sure that you feel confident that you can do this on your own as well. So
Ah,
i
yeah.
i like his book. I also interviewed Erin Lowry. She has a book called Broke Millennial. It's actually a 3-part series. That 3-part series is really solid. Her first book is some of the basics. The second book is all about Broke Millennial for investing. So if you don't feel confidence around investing, she breaks it down, kind of the ABCs to it. People hear mutual funds and S&P 500 and 401k, and they get overwhelmed very quickly. She starts with the assumption that you don't know anything and leads all the way through her book. And then our last book, which is what I interviewed her on my podcast, which I think was like episode 35, if you're searching for it. She talked about money and relationships, just like,
Mm.
dude, Michael must not need this, but if he picked this up, it was a lot of similar conversation of how to have money conversations with your spouse, with your parents, with your kids, with these important relationships in your life, and how to broach this conversation, or how to broach conversations, money conversations with with these people, because of course, like we've been mentioning here, we don't talk about it enough, and we don't know how to talk about it, and it's really challenging. So she does a really good job breaking those down.
Thank you for that, my friend. And I want to talk about the Struggle is Real community and the podcast. I love what you're building and the education and the sharing around these things that were never taught. So, filing. I love how you in your little intro talk about, filing taxes, making friends, the power of being social, all of these things. I'm like, yes, this is what we should be taught.
Yes.
And as you've been building this community and this journey, what has been some of your biggest aha moments?
Well, I got to hat tip you, because I feel like you're a really strong community builder, and through your podcast and seeing you on your social media accounts as well, I'm picking up some things that I'm like, ooh, I want to do some of those things as well. So I wouldn't say that at the forefront I'm a really strong community builder. It's definitely something that I'm spending more time doing right now. The podcast came out initially as an education platform, and I realized you got to build community around that as well. One aha moment that I learned very early on through the podcast was, it doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is, I got caught up early on, once again, trying to perfect everything about the conversations that I was releasing out to the world. And then I kind of started to let that go a little bit and just throw it out there for what it is. And I started to get a lot of reception from people that will just say like amazing things like, hey, I really enjoyed this conversation, or I love what you're doing with this, or this is exactly what I was looking for in my life right now. And I was like, whoa, that hit me. And I was like, I no longer have an obligation to make perfect episodes, but I do have an obligation to share this with my community, because they are asking for it. They need it. They want it. And that's been a really wonderful experience for me, and kind of that aha of like, okay, we're in it together. And they like that they've seen me grow over the last 2.5 years as a podcaster, and as a community builder, and as an educator, and all of these things. And I learned so much from my community as well. And it's so great to just hop on calls with people that, were listeners that are now friends of mine. And we just talk about, God, the shit that's really hard in life. It's hard. Life is freaking hard.
There are two thoughts that come to the forefront of my mind. And the first thing I want to pick up on is how you talked about letting go. And one of the things that I've been really focused on this year is leaning into my intuition. It was something that I never even took the time to lean into, or those gut whispers I would run the other way from if it was scary. Do you feel like, as you've grown this podcast, the getting rid of this perfectionist syndrome, letting go, do you feel like you've been able to hear that inner gut whisper of yours louder?
Yes, 100%. Actually, a major focus of mine this year has been on saying yes. And I found that a major barrier or roadblock to saying yes was around this, like these little, whispers that happen sometimes that are like, you're not good at that. Don't try that. Or like, you might make a fool of yourself. Don't do that kind of thing. And I'm like, you know what? Screw it. Screw it. That is not the focus of this year. The focus is on saying yes. So I say it, okay, Megan asked me to come on her podcast. I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I don't know her community. I don't know if I can provide value. Get rid of all that shit and just say yes to it. And come on, share some wisdom, be you, be authentic, be vulnerable. And I found leaning into that side versus the other side. And I mean, both are whispers in my ear, and just amplifying these whispers over here has allowed me to make such more of an impact, and to have so much joy and have so much more fun in life.
Oh, I love that. I love that. What has been one of the biggest things that you've said yes to, that you were like, oh shit, I can't believe I said yes to this? Has there been one or a couple of things that you're like, oh my God, I'm scared shitless to do this. I can't believe I just said yes.
I mentioned the ultra marathon earlier. I think that was definitely a slow yes that came around that I'm so glad that I eventually said yes to. That's kind of the monumental one. But honestly, the ones that impressed me the most are actually the little ones
Mm.
that I'm like, someone's like, hey, we should hit a karaoke bar tonight. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that. And then I'm like, I don't want to do that. That means I got to say yes. Here we go. And you just say yes to it. It's kind of those small little things that are like really pushing me outside my comfort zone on the day to day that I feel like have left a huge impact. And I don't need to say yes to everything, but I try to focus on at least saying yes to one thing that I typically say no to every single week. And that has led me down so many incredible paths. There is only maybe 1 out of 10 times I'm like, whoa, I wish I wouldn't have said yes to this. This is quite the experience. But more times than not, I come out of that and I'm like, that was one of my favorite nights of the year so far.
Oh my God, that's great. I want you, my mind is going a mile a minute as as you're telling the story. I want you to hold me to it because I need to do more of that. I
Mm.
like to stay in my comfort zone where I'm good, where I'm validated, and I never push myself out of that comfort zone. So I want you, Justin Peters, to call me on my shit and come back and be like, Meg, what have you done that you were scared to do?
I'll put a calendar reminder in my phone right now that 30 days from now I'll ask you.
Please do. Please do. And then the other thing I want to ask you about, which I love how you talked about builds when you have these conversations with folks that's as strangers listening to the podcast and the vulnerability and letting the mask down. And I'd be curious your take on this. For a long time, I just hid behind a mask that everything was good, it was good, I was good. And I never really had true conversations with anyone in my life, like real conversations. And then I found that the more comfortable I got, having these conversations with myself first, leaning into what I wanted, being comfortable sharing it slowly but surely, did I feel more comfortable having these vulnerable conversations with people in my life. And it has brought our relationships to levels that are much closer and higher and connected than I could have ever imagined. What's your take and your journey on having these vulnerable, real, letting the mask down conversations?
I think it's everything. It's really hard to build substantial relationships with people without that mindset. That's the beauty of being a podcaster too. I get to turn these relationships with strangers into amazing relationships in such a short period of time. And that's usually because we're diving deep, we're throwing the mask off, we're having conversations about their struggles in life. I like to lean in and share some of my struggles. We connect on an emotional level. And I've realized that just exponentially forwards the relationship to levels that I'm like, wow, I would consider a couple of my podcast guests some of my best friends that I have at this current moment. And in terms of FaceTime, it's actually one of them I'm thinking about right now. I've never even met in person. And it's incredible that we can just hop on a call and we can share our struggles, what's going on in life, what our aspirations are, all of these different things, and just be so vulnerable about things that are making us nervous right now, or, things that we feel like are holding us back. It's so key, but it's hard. It's really, really hard.
Oh, yeah, because if you can't even be like, I know for me, when I look back on my journey, when my relationships were really all facade level, I wasn't even comfortable being honest with myself.
hmm There, that is so true. So I had a guest on, Susan Bratton. She's really interesting. She is a sexpert actually, and you talk about vulnerability and uncomfortability.
Yeah.
That area for majority of people, I find, is that hits everything. It's very hard, even with your most intimate relationships, like your partner, like your spouse, like your
Yes.
girlfriend. It can still be hard to talk about things in that space with them, and to see her bravado and how she approaches those conversations and how much confidence she has around them. That's been another like uncomfortable, thing that I've embraced a little bit, is just like having some of these conversations and asking for what I want sometimes, and like leaning into some of these things. She's really changed my life in terms of like a guest that's come on, and the thought leadership that she shared. And also, another big takeaway aha moment that I had from Susan too, I never looked at sex as a learnable skill. Like I always thought like,
Mm.
sex is just like we should know how to have sex. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's human. It's innate. Like, what's going on here? And she's like, that is not true. Just like personal finances, just like running a business, just like all of these other things, like there's education that's involved with sex. There's skills that you have to learn and develop that, are critically important to sex and intimacy and passionate lovemaking, all of these things. And she was saying these things, and I'm just like, I'm just this male over here that figures, there's one way to do it, but here it is. There, it's not. And she gave me some she gave me the okay to be like, Justin, like, appreciate how far your brain has got you, and your just like innate abilities and thoughts have gotten you to this point, but also you haven't had any educators around sex outside of the porn stars or the health, high school health teachers that are out there. Give yourself a break for like not feeling confident about this area of your life. And I'm like, oh, thank you, Susan Bratton.
Oh my God, I love that. And what I think too is because we're so uncomfortable talking about sex that you don't even talk about it with your partner.
Yeah.
So, like, when was the last time you asked your partner what they want? Are they satisfied? What are they looking for? Like, I remember, Michael and I have very open conversation around our sex life and what we want. But I think that's because we had open conversation in all these other facets. But I know for a long time in many of my other relationships, we never talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
We never talked about it.
Oh yeah, it's so true. It's hard, and I get it. I know why we don't. But Susan, and I know you speak to high achievers, and that's your audience.
Yep.
And Susan laid on it like right away, because I'm very professional, personal development driven as well, and so is my audience. And she's like, the people that are best at sex are personal finance or personal development junkies, because they look at sex as a learnable skill, and they are okay with where they at because they know they can get to another level, and that's not holding them back. And one of those major issues, and surprise, surprise, a lot of what we talked about on the show was communication, was just being comfortable talking about it. And how do you broach it? And like, how do you tell what you want, and all of these different things. It was so fun to have that conversation and to explore that. And honestly, she's amazing. You should check her out if you're interested in having her on a show too. I'll totally introduce you guys.
Please connect us.
Yeah, awesome. She'd be a lot of fun. But she's just like, you know what? What I found was, okay, maybe Gabby and I, my girlfriend, aren't necessarily the most confident in telling each other what we want when it comes to the bedroom. We each shared an AirPod and listened to Susan while I was prepping for the episode, and it sparked so much good conversation. So I highly encourage you guys, go check out Susan Bratton. She was on a recent episode of mine too. So I loved my conversation with her as well. And like I said, Meg, you should totally have her on the show too. I think your audience might get a kick out of it. She's very brash and straightforward with so many things.
That's our type of woman right there.
Yes.
I am going to link it in the show notes so you guys can just click and you don't have to look into it.
Okay.
I love that. My friend, where can we find more of you, Justin Peters, you beautiful, amazing human? Where can we follow you? Where can we find you? How can we get more of you?
The struggle is real with Justin Peters. On whatever podcast player you're listening to right now, I'm there. So I'd encourage you just to search for the podcast, look at the last 2 or 3 episodes that I've had, download and listen to one that you feel speaks to you. And if you really like the show, subscribe to it and follow along.
You're the best. I loved this time with you.
Ditto.
Here's to good humans.
Yes, agreed. Right. And we covered so many topics. How did we just end on sex? That was
man. I gotta tell you what, we went and we didn't even plan that. See, this is the best. Talk about just going with it. We just went with the flow. And I loved how we talked about all the major topics in life.
Sex, finances, relationships, your career. What else did we not cover?
Thank you, my friend. I loved you for being here. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for letting your mask down. Thanks for sharing your wisdom and your story. I love you.
Love you too, Meg. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show, guys. She is so much fun and such a great host. I really enjoyed being on the show. Continue to follow along. If you're not subscribed to her right now, hit the subscribe button. Come on. Meg's got so much good content that's coming out. So thanks again for having me on the show.
Thanks, Justin. Struggle is real. Check it out.